Hello, everyone. Imagine a world where your wildest ideas don't just stay in your head, they change lives. A world where a computer fits in your pocket, where a phone becomes a cultural icon, where imagination meets reality. That was the world Steve Jobs built. But here's the thing. Steve Jobs wasn't born a genius. He wasn't superhuman. He just thought differently. Today, I'm going to share how you can think like Steve Jobs. Not to copy him, but to unlock your own potential. Let's dive into 5 key principles that defined his mindset. Ready? First, Steve Jobs believed in doing what you love. He once said, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." When Steve was kicked out of Apple, the company he founded in 1985, most people would have given up. Not Steve. He followed his passion and started Next, a company focused on building cutting-edge computers. He also bought Pixar, a struggling animation studio, because he believed in the power of storytelling. Guess what? Next's technology helped Apple rebuild itself when Steve returned, and Pixar gave us Toy Story, revolutionizing animation. His passion wasn't just a hobby, it was his compass. How can you apply this? Ask yourself, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Maybe it's designing apps, teaching kids, or solving big problems like climate change. Whatever it is, chase it relentlessly. Don't settle for good enough. Steve didn't. He dropped out of college because it wasn't sparking his curiosity. And that bold move led him to calligraphy classes that later inspired Apple's beautiful fonts. Passion fuels greatness. Next, Steve was obsessed with simplicity. He believed complexity was the enemy of progress. Look at the iPod. Back in 2001, MP3 players were clunky, with confusing buttons and menus. Steve's team at Apple stripped away the noise. They created a device with one wheel, one screen, and a promise. 1,000 songs in your pocket. Simple. Iconic. This wasn't just about design, it was a way of thinking. Steve once said, "Simple can be harder than complex." It takes courage to cut away what's unnecessary, whether it's features in a product or distractions in your life. How can you think simpler? Try this. Next time you're working on something, a project, a presentation, even a to-do list, ask, what's the one thing that matters here? Focus on that. Eliminate the rest. When I was preparing this talk, I had a dozen ideas for what to include, but I kept coming back to Steve's core principles. So I simplified. Less is more. Steve Jobs didn't invent computers or phones. What he did invent was a way to connect ideas in unexpected ways. He called it connecting the dots. In his 2005 Stanford commencement address, he talked about how his calligraphy class inspired the typography in the Macintosh. At the time, it seemed random, but years later, it clicked. This is what made Apple different. The iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was a computer, a camera, and a music player, all woven together beautifully. Steve saw patterns others missed because he explored beyond tech, art, music, Zen Buddhism. How can you connect dots? Step outside your bubble. If you're a coder, read about psychology. If you're a teacher, study design. Last month, I met a chef who learned coding to create an app for sharing recipes that's connecting dots. The more you explore, the more dots you'll have to connect. Your next big idea might come from a place you least expect. Let's talk about failure. Steve Jobs failed a lot. The Apple Lisa? A commercial flop. The first Next computers? Too expensive, barely sold. Getting fired from Apple? Public humiliation. But Steve didn't see failure as a dead end. He saw it as feedback. When he returned to Apple in 1997, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. He used everything he'd learned from his failures to launch the iMac, iPod, and eventually the iPhone. He said, "Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. How can you embrace failure? Start small. Try something new this week. A hobby, a side project, a bold pitch. If it flops, don't hide. Ask, what did I learn? I once pitched a business idea that tanked. Nobody got it. But that failure taught me how to communicate better, and my next pitch landed funding. Failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of it. Finally, Steve Jobs was a visionary. He didn't just build products, he built dreams. He didn't ask, what do customers want? He asked, what should they want? When Apple launched the iPhone, nobody was clamoring for a touchscreen phone. But Steve's vision, his ability to see a future others couldn't, made it reality. How can you lead with vision? Think big, but start small. Share your ideas with others. Paint a picture of what's possible. If you're leading a team, don't just give tasks. Give them a mission. I once worked with a group struggling to stay motivated. Instead of focusing on deadlines, I shared why our project mattered, how it could help people. Suddenly, everyone was all in. Vision turns work into purpose. So let's recap. To think like Steve Jobs, follow your passion, simplify everything, connect the dots, embrace failure, and lead with vision. You don't need to be Steve Jobs to change the world. You just need to think differently, like he did. Here's my challenge to you. This week, pick one of these principles and try it. Maybe simplify a project, take a risk, or share a bold idea. You might not invent the next iPhone, but you'll start unlocking your own creativity and potential. Steve once said, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So go be crazy. Go make your dent in the universe. Thank you.